here in Queen's, Dr. Gail McConnell. Gail's a senior lecturer in the School of Arts, English and Languages, specialising in contemporary Irish poetry. Gail has published several collections of poetry already. Father Mother in 2019 and 14 in 2018. Father Mother was shortlisted for the Michael Marks Poetry Award and was made into a programme for BBC Radio 4. She's also published a monograph on Northern Irish poetry and theology, published by Palgrave Press in 2014. So it's a great pleasure to have Gail here today to talk about her new collection, The Sun is Open, which was published just a few months ago. Just a month ago, so it's hot off the presses, and the title of Gail's presentation is a grammar in which everything is significant. It's a quotation from Ciaran Carson. Poems and reflections from The Sun is Open. So over to you.
Yeah. I don't know where to look first. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Am I kind of on the camera? Okay.
You are.
Yeah. Okay. It's lovely to see you and lovely to feel your pixelated presence for those of you who are joining us from further away. Thanks so much for being here. Presentation is possibly a bit of an oversell for what you're going to get this afternoon. It's just some poems, but I'll talk a bit about them. I suppose this is a bit of an experiment because you perhaps don't typically have readings from a so-called creative book in an Irish Study seminar series. So it's an interesting thing to do in and of itself. I have a feeling that the poem can be an act of criticism, and I also have a feeling that the poem can be a revelation and it can open up so much. And that word open is really interesting to me and full of resonance. I'm really interested in the possibilities of a poem and what it can open. So to tell you a little bit about this book, it's really a book-length poem. So you really read it from the front to the back, maybe in one sitting. All the poems are little, I'm going to hold this up to the camera so people can see. They're kind of like little blocks of text on the page without any titles, and mostly actually always without punctuation. So they're in these kind of columns on the page, and you'll see that there is some grey material, and the grey material indicates kind of found material because the stuff in here is collated from a whole range of sources, or some of it is. At the heart of the book is an autobiographical event, and the autobiographical event took place in March 1984. I was 3.5. My mother and I were in the front driveway waving my father off to work. He was an assistant governor in the Maze prison, and he was shot and killed in the driveway. And a lot of my life has been spent living in the long aftermath of that event. And this is a book which tries to come to terms with that history, but also tries to think through the difficulty of coming to terms with that history, the difficulty of commemoration in the decade of centenaries that we're in, and the centenary of partition, or the birthplace of the beginning of Northern Ireland, depending on your politics. It thinks through all of that, and it thinks through it thinks along with something I call the dad box. And the dad box is one of those flat pack crap boxes from IKEA, which I put together, and into that box I put a lot of stuff that my aunts and my grandparents and my mother had given me about my dad's death and about his life, but a lot about his death. So there were cutouts from the Belfast Telegraph, from the newsletter, from Hansard, where his murder was debated in the Commons and the Lords, reports from his time at Queen's. He was a student in history and politics here in the late 1960s. His diaries, his student union diaries from his time at Queen's, school magazines with athletic reports in them, photographs, all sorts of things. So I chart the experience in this book of sort of going through this box and of sifting through this stuff and of trying to work out what to do with it, really, and to try to think about the relationship that I have with my dad. In the kind of long history of this place with its various troubles and various politics. It was a real joy. It was one of the real joys of my life to get to share this book with Ciaran and to have his eye and ear on the poems. And I chose this phrase, you know, it's his phrase. I'll read out the kind of sentence that he gifted me about this book, because I think it says a lot about what I think I was trying to do and didn't realise. So Ciaran wrote this: "The Sun is Open employs a grammar in which everything is significant, from Wendy houses to the very hairs of your head, to the poetry of first aid instructions, to slaters." My English editor didn't know what slaters were. We had to put a note in. They're woodlice, if you don't know. This is meticulous and painstaking, sometimes pain-making work, making the words fit the columns, be they inches of newsprint or entries in an account book, negotiating or nudging the meanings into alternative senses, a series of ethical considerations and transactions, credits and debits that sometimes demand to be accounted for or judged or at least spoken of in the light of whatever the forensics might or might never unfold. So I wanted to create an expansive book where the Belfast Telegraph and Superman and the IRA statement about my father's murder and playing Game Boy on my playing Tetris on my Game Boy, and watching Banana Man and going to a Baptist church and singing hymns, where all of that could get into the texture of the book and where everything could belong, because I'm conscious of the living through this event and the multiple ways that event can be read and understood. And I suppose I speak with you with a certain level of nervousness today because I feel like I'm always in the company of bright historians who might ask me difficult questions about history, but it's a book that's thinking about the difficulty of history and the difficulty of trying to speak histories that are always already personal and always already public, that, you know, they're private and public all at once, and that politics is intimate. So I think that's probably enough by way of introduction. What I'm going to do for 25 minutes or so is just read from this book, and I hope you will come with me into The Sun is Open. I'm going to take a few sips of tea along the way because I think I might be losing my voice. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Peter, for that warm introduction. Begin with victim on his back is how this could begin. Place your mouth over his mouth. Pinch his nostrils shut. Easier to take what I have found and break it up. Breathe steadily till victim's chest begins to rise. Pause every minute to glue it back the wrong way. Take a deep breath yourself. If there is no air exchange, do not touch him. You come into this world head first. Come in on your rump, they call it breech. You may be lifted out. I'm making soft returns. For this, you need 2 keys. Shift and enter to go down the line, carries on, the carriage moving back. Our house was on a street that slanted at the bottom. A carriageway you didn't cross, 4 lanes all going 50 to a roundabout nearby. The dog next door was Honey, a lab as old as me, who loved to lie on the just cut lawn and sniff, her tail going in the afternoon sun. My teeth are made of milk. Deciduous, he calls them. Mum goes first. 3 sound, 1 sound, 1, 2, 3. The nurse writes it all down. She rinses, then it's me. I see the hairs inside his nose, my mouth all big. He taps each tooth, E, D, C, B, A, B, C, D, E. Only there's a gap where C should be. Before you hit the sack, get rid of plaque, says Superted. A spotty man from outer space brought him to life with cosmic dust. I stick it on the wall, fight tooth decay the He-Man way. When I wake up, it's gone. Under my pillow, there's a coin. She's still asleep. I watch cartoons. Banana Man smiles back at me. Then Dr. Gloom whacks him with a mallet. Bonk. His head submerged inside his chest. His eyes roll round and round. The doctor points the gun, directs the age-reversing rays, and turns into a baby with one tooth. The crow has a banana. What saves the day is a mirror. Purple rays bounce back. Now the doctor's just a tot. There was a time when I was Brian, like our neighbour 6 doors down. I had a skateboard with a monkey skull on the underside. My cards read, "Happy birthday, Brian," whose dad, we knew not to say, was in the police. That day, he must have been dead scared, hearing the shots. They're coming now, for him, for me, he might have thought. He had a test in school that day. He knew if X, then Y, but couldn't make the pencil cross the page. It lay along his pointer, then he folded back 3 fingers, raised his thumb to make a gun shape. God made the sun, the stars, the moon, or did he make the bang? We learned about the Milky Way, not just a chocolate bar with soft white air inside. It is a spiral whirlpool of stars, and one out there on the edge is yellow. That's our sun. Night and day he made, and trees, and peas, and Wendy houses, tricycles, sunglasses that go snap. Let there be light, let lights appear, and let the air be filled with birds. The little hinge that moves their legs like knees. My elbows, knees, and toes, all numbered, are the very hairs of my head, and even all my bones. You assemble it yourself. It came flat pack, a square with folded sides. You put them all in place and twist in shallow screws. You punch the pins through holes, fold back the legs, put in what you have. Mostly piles of cutouts from the papers, 8 inches thick. Church bulletins, school magazines, Hansard Bibles, a student's union diary from his time at Queen's, reports, things he wrote. Hey presto, got a dad box. Wrote that on the side, not sure why. When we have guests, I turn it to the wall. When I want to see inside, I make piles on the spare room bed and on the floor, and forget what it was I was looking for. The patient is pale, his skin cold and clammy. Quick and irregular shock can occur. Send for a doctor, slow pulse and pallor. Give him a sweet drink, lay his arms down. Kneel at his head, place the palms down. Your mouth over his, the first movement starts. Breathing out, breathing in. When breathing has stopped, allow lungs to empty. Take your lips from his face. The patient should lie in a cool, shady place, his head raised so blood can drain from his brain. An airy square, a cube of plastic poles, a polyester sheet over the top with windows on, a roof, even flowers and boxes on the sills, a hole behind the painted door. I sat inside with her. Her second name was Bond. I like the thought of it, the way it makes a bed, the B and D, the headboard and the footboard at the other end, the on contained inside. We played house. Tea poured into cups not there, whose handles we held between thumb and forefinger, entertaining each other as guests. The grass was cool. We plucked the blades. A handful made confetti when the game was weddings. She became a home economics teacher. In our house upon the lawn, no noise outside. A bird, sometimes, a helicopter. Going through the box, I was reading Ireland, Johnston, Jones, Moreland, Morrison, MacDonald, thinking, where's my name? McDowell, McFarlane, Knocker, or it was the other side she'd cut and kept. The headline, it was us. Family sees jail chief shot dead. PM backs her Ulster team. Tell us the truth, urges jail widow. The haunting of the NIO. Faith alive in Belfast. Crosswords on the back. Moor days evade iron prism. We burned the boats. We burned the sweets. We burned the packages they came in, burned the leaves along the path. We burned the bits of paper dropped on pavement slabs. We burned the sign that said wet paint, burned the grass and then the edges of our shoes. We burned our laces at the end, the plastic melting as they frayed. We burned a tract left on a bench. We burned the matches in the box and burned the box the matches came in. How did we spin the thread that tethered each to each? Me, you, me. How did we exist before these letters, all these sounds? I know sound, we had enough to sound out the line between us. I had a sound for you. By it, I called you Daddy. You had one for me, the name you gave me, between 1 and 2 syllables, Gail, you called me, your twice voiced daughter. White cotton handkerchief. You knotted all the corners and set it on my head under the sun at Helen's Bay. I knew it happened in a photo. I know it happened from a photo. I know it happened, and the photo is something you have left. He left the vertical, went from to a changing shape, a fall, a turn, 90 degrees. I look up vertical. It turns to vertex, the apex, the crown of the head, a whirlpool swirling into a vert, turning his head, my mother shouting, "Bill!" Turning it towards what was coming. On the carpet tiles, the plastic seats, a table for colouring in. A box of crayons said my name. I stay inside the lines. A man inside a lion's den. A giant falls. A small boy hurled a stone. It whizzed through air. In dreams, a king saw 7 cows, all sleek and fat, and 7 more, bony and thin, who swallowed up the fat ones, ate them whole. Pink legs, white heads, black lumps, grass green. My sheets from Sunday school. The good news. We recite the old ones first. You get a bookmark and a lollipop for every memory verse. I put my fingers on the sands and make my own. Shepherd, let me rest. Grass quiet. Go through the deep with me. My enemies see me. Know my house. The tremblies, we call it, when my body shakes, can't make it stop except by sleep, and I keep being sick even when there's nothing left. It comes on me, can't make it stop. We went to Dr. Breach, who listened to my chest and asked about my movements. I said about my skateboard and the way our street slopes down. You go quite fast the second half and have to walk back to the top. Cold metal on my chest. I'm breathing in and out. Next time it happens, Mum gets out a notebook, writes down what we had for tea. I hope it isn't alpha bites that I can't eat or beans. On the cover, zig and zag. Another murder book had diary bits to show the corpse, alive, alive-o. Here goes. Take the first step to a more secure future with the Northern Bank. In case of accident, please inform Olivetti typewriters and adding machines. 1968, Easter Day, April 14. Come alive, drink Pepsi, the drink of your generation. Next, before Advent, snowing hard, missed church, got tape recorder, history essay due. I have his books. Home from the Strand, I go there too, still sanding from the 30s. How historical are history books? How effective was the organisation of public opinion for political murders in the period 1714 to 1830? Misread purposes for murders. His peas have no descenders. Did Becket deserve his martyr's crown? A quarter moon on Hogmanay. I see headstone lane, New Cross River underground. Just to say, just to say, just to say. A trio of cards saying nothing to say. Just this. Just grief. Just not what is just. For so long, it was hard to mourn, thinking from that side of things. Bad bastard, screw in the mechanism, the panopticon, the architecture of brutality. Knowing the theory, the cruel, ingenious cage, thinking, shit, that's him, on the wrong side of the gaze. The safe house on the street I see through here beside my screen. I must have known that was the street, but didn't know I knew until I started going through the box. Up at the Famine Village, near Five Finger Strand, the villagers are topped-up mannequins in tweed, bad wigs, white shirts still with their fold lines. After the eviction scene, the Irish Wake and Orange Hall, a safe house, secret passageways to find and pass through, portals to another room, and then another opening. Oh, what a fun house, boys and girls. The stuff of thrillers, wigs washed in the kitchen sink, 2 pairs of rubber gloves burnt in the yard, the briefcase tucked up in the attic, submachine gun snug inside, clean towels for everyone, the spinner going on, 3rd time that afternoon. Safe, 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 safe. The state in which a gun cannot be fired at a chest or a face. A container for protecting provisions. Refuge. Hello, it's me, and I've just seen a face in your guitar book, corners folded down, your lyrics penciled in between those lonely nights. I have it now. I hold its body to my own and put my fingers where yours were, pressing each string to the board. I touch each one and turn the key until the sound, I hope, is close. It's an echo. Echo made the sound she heard. The sound she heard became her voice. Her voice returned his words, here come to me, to me. He turned on her. She turned to stone, her bones hollowed. A voice lives in her still. My father rejoices. That's what it means. My name, I mean, but did he? What, if anything, was the source of his joy? Was there joy between us before he left? Or after he walked through the hall, the squeaky door saddle, across the tiles, walking outside into the morning, into those bullets sailing through the blue air, into perforation, into a heap, into gravel, an almost human shape, into death, into silence, or whatever comes after. Look to the mountains. Help will come. Let your awake guard you. The sun will not hurt. Day, moon, night, come and go. Thank you for listening.
Gail, thank you so much for that. It's incredibly difficult material to write about, so deeply traumatic and personal. Let me throw it open to questions. So people in the room, those of you online, if you'd like to ask a question, just press the hand icon on your screen, and you'll be able to speak directly to Gail. So, would anyone like to start? Yes.
Just, I suppose, like an easy poetry-related question rather than a philosophical one. The choice of the justified blocks, it always seems to me, the words been used in the past, it's more like a narrative form. It's almost, would you say, these poems are almost prose poems in a way, but then also because there's a kind of porous, because there's so many different things going into it as well, it's kind of like a closed sort of form at the same time. So, and the second question, what's my emphasis on the sort of the graying out of the found objects. I mean, a lot of poets would kind of just include the found stuff in the body of the poem and not kind of mark it out, or just is there a distinct boundary, or is the found stuff elsewhere in the poems it's not grayed out?
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Loads of sense. Thank you, Connor. It's lovely to see you. I didn't realise that was you under this mask. So, Connor was in an Irish poetry module I did last year. Do you want me to repeat that for teams? Is that okay? Yeah. Or do you want me to? So the questions, bright questions from Connor. The questions are, what are the questions? The first one is about the form of the poem and whether I consider these to be prose poems, and how do I think about the form. And the second one is about the grey material. So I can speak, a little bit about both of those things, and thank you for the question. What I found to be very freeing was the process of creating a template in Word, creating the column and writing into that box. And I found that very freeing because I didn't have to think about lineation. I didn't have to think about breaks. There was enough that was breaking. So I could just type, and I didn't have to think about where to stop the line, and I didn't have to think about punctuation. So I could kind of just write at its, without too much fuss and bother. And what was lovely about that process was that there were some happy accidents of seeing of where the line did break. And so then it was a process of sort of going back and looking kind of line by line and thinking about where I want the poem to end. So I don't think about them as prose poems. And one of the books, or some of the books that I know were really influential, would be something like Ciaran's Until, Before, After, where the line gets really short and where he really understands the weight of prepositions, and he knows that things like what and whatever and which and when they just do so much work. And so I think about this as a book it's funny. On the one hand, it's all flow because everything's so compressed. There's not even a comma, so it's just endless flow. On the other hand, it's all breaks because every line ending, if you like, in each column is chosen. Like I've thought about each word at the end of the line. So I wanted both of those things. So it's unlike, I don't think of them as prose poems. Well, what are they? I don't know. I mean, you can probably come up with a good description for what they are, but it was doing lyric by other means, I suppose. So there was something about that containment and compression, which was just very, very useful. And then there are poems in this that break out. There's an erasure poem, which is using my mother's witness statement, where I kind of break out of that model, and there are moments where different things happen. There's kind of 8 blocks that happen when we think about the space of Maze or Long Kesh. So there are different things that happen. And then the grey thing, when I was launching this book in Queen's recently, Tara McAvoy was introducing, she said a bright thing about the grey. She said it's a sense of sort of the material, the found material kind of ghosting everything else. And it's grey, the found material is grey because I want to indicate that sense of a continuum between the sort of quote unquote source material and my language, because of course you can't separate those things out, right? Everything is found and everything is new. It's that like, so like I remember somebody saying that I didn't put in grey the word Tupperware. I thought, yeah, well, I didn't, but the whole book could be in grey too, because language is historical and everything comes from everywhere else. So there's that sense in which there are these particular texts, and there's a set of notes at the back so you can look and see exactly what the source is. But I wanted it had to be grey so that I could indicate that sort of sense of a continuum. There was a time when we tried to put them into red and it just looked really terrible. I like the idea because I thought it's like it's sort of from the Bible, and there was another book that had done that, and it was so wrong because it didn't make aesthetic sense actually in terms of that continuum. So that's the reason for the grey. Does that answer your questions? Thanks, Connor. Was it good? I like this.
Thanks, Connor. We've got Fran with us online. So Fran, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, go ahead.
Hello, Gail.
Hello, I didn't know you were going to be here. Nice to see you.
Yes, school run, which is why I'm not there in person. I have a question about source material, which is just perhaps to satisfy my own curiosity. Did you just go serendipitously on what was in the box, or did you research it outside that?
Good question. Yeah. So, a lot of serendipity. Yes, using the box, but then going outside it. Like, one of the things I'm very conscious is in this book is it quotes from the IRA statement about my dad's murder, and it sets that kind of alongside a letter of recommendation that somebody wrote for him. So I'll just try and find the page actually. Yeah, so it reads on the left, an eminent Christian worker, and on the right, a bad man. And I just wanted to bring these things actually into the same poem, not even into the recto and verso, the sort of landscape, but right into the same poem. And it felt really important to go outside the box too, because I was aware that every archive has an ideology, right? Whether it's a family or it's Emory or it's wherever, every archive has a politics. And so the dad box was the core of it, but then it was really important to go outside of that as well. But I didn't research it meticulously because I just didn't have the emotional energy. Like I found that I struggled. There were only certain times where I could sort of go into that material, and then the act of sort of packing it all up or closing all the tabs, and walking away was really important too. So it's sort of endless. It's potentially endless. There's so much more that I could do, and there's more I could say about the aftermath of this history, because that's the thing about living in an aftermath. There's no end to it. But yeah, the dad box, other things too, and then literary sources, and that was the joy, because there's Keats and Shakespeare and other bits and bobs in here too, which were not in the dad box.
Thanks.
Thank you. I like that question.
Let's go back to the room. We have another question, Liam.
Gail, thank you very much. It's very moving.
Thank you.
There used to be a generalization at one stage that poets and creative writers more generally weren't responding adequately to the troubles. I don't know whether that's a achievable generalization still or not, but perhaps a more specific question. Are you the first poet to draw directly on your own experience of terror?
Sadly, no, not even close. There are just, it's sort of everybody, isn't it? Really, it's everybody who's from this place. Whether it's Heedy writing about Colin McCarthy, or Courtney, or Michael Longley writing about the ice cream man, or Ciaran writing about kind of bomb scares in Belfast. It's everybody, and it's also the generation that is younger than me. I mean, what's really interesting to me now teaching is that most of my students are born kind of 1998 or afterwards, after the Good Friday Agreement, and they really have a sense of how they've inherited Trouble's history. And I try to be really attuned to that. And some of them have lost family members kind of back up through the generations, and intergenerational trauma really means something to them. They understand that kind of Lyra McKee wisdom about what we've passed down, because we haven't dealt with, I think, fully the pain of the past. And I'm really interested that Ciaran described this as pain-making work, that one of the things that the book does is to actually make pain. And I was actually conscious of that as I was reading you all these poems today, that I know that these are difficult to listen to as well. And that feels important, because I think, sometimes poetry is put under pressure to, yes, speak adequately, and also even not beyond speaking adequately, to actually do something like the work of reconciliation, or the work of redemption, or the work of something kind of, Arnoldian and sort of quasi-redemptive. And I would really like our politicians to do that work. And I think sometimes poetry has to speak to pain, because we haven't yet, as a civil society, found any useful kind of communal process to speak well about the pain of our lives, whether you have lost someone directly or just lived in this place. Everybody is touched by it. So in that sense, no, I'm not even close to being, you know, someone who's experienced it directly. I'm just like everybody else in a way. And yes, I've had this particularly traumatic experience, but the kind of strange gift of that, I suppose, is that it attunes you to what we're all living with anyway, which is loss all the time. And we're more conscious of it now because of COVID, that we're living with loss of various forms. But I don't know, I didn't necessarily expect to create a book that was about, that had pain at its core, but and there's joy in the book too. But more and more, I think, actually, yeah, the work of speaking to that pain is essential. It just can't be bypassed. And I think we've tried to bypass it in Northern Ireland through all kinds of means, that most of which are, you know, money making, and we're reaping it now. Like we can see it this year. We've let down our young people who are rioting. Anyway, I won't preach, but yeah. So I think we're all touched. And this book just tries to find a very direct and more explicit way of dealing with what we're all touched by, I think.
Okay, thank you, Liam. Let's go online again. TJ Dyer, if you're there, just ask a question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Tim Dwyer, tuning in from Bangor down the road there. And I very much appreciate your presentation. I think great courage, and I think it really sustained very, very well. My question is, I think in terms of poetry, often when there's very intense personal experience or community experience, it's quite a challenge to craft a poem that can carry that and be a very crafted, good poem. And I think you certainly succeeded in that. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the process of doing that, the challenge of that with such very personal, very intense and traumatic experience.
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your kind words. It's probably useful to frame my answer in the context of earlier work. So I wrote a long poem called Typeface. Started writing it, I think, in 2015. And I published it online. It's about 320 lines in sort of couplets. And Typeface is a poem about my experience of reading a historical inquiry team report about my father's murder that was written in Comic Sans, which, if you don't know, Comic Sans is kind of a jazz hands font that you see, you know, to advertise children's parties and stuff. So it was just an extraordinarily jarring experience to receive this ring-bound file in Comic Sans that had phrases like laceration of the brain. I mean, like, you know, the dark humor of Irish literature it's because, I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. But anyway, so and as I was reading that report and as I was writing this long poem about it, I was just so conscious of the 3,000 other people who were sitting with something similar on their living room table, trying to work out how to even begin to absorb that material. So all that to say that I had done quite a lot of the work, by which I mean emotional and mental and psychological work already. That was a poem that was written in, I'd say, more of a situation of distress and in the night, and it was a dark period of my life trying to write that thing. But it really, it really helped, actually. I mean, it's that people sort of say, was it cathartic? And I sort of generally hate that question, you know. But I think it's another one of those demands that you put on art. But personally speaking, it was very. It helped, it sort of soothed something in me, and it was quite an angry poem and quite ironic in its tone. So with this, I had a different ambition. I was coming back to the same material, but with a different frame, and I wanted this to be, as I said, kind of an expansive book, but also that it really had my childhood self in it, and not from the adult perspective, and that actually to write those childlike voices into it was really interesting. And I was thinking at the time about becoming a parent, and I wrote it before I became a parent. I actually drafted it. I think I'm really bad on dates and timelines and things. I should keep a diary. I think I drafted it first in 2017, and then sort of have revisited it and added bits and edited it over the years, and sort of finished it in 19, I think. Where are we? Yeah. But yeah, I think, and in that time, in those years, I did become a parent in 2018. So there was something about sort of childhood and parenthood and language acquisition and seeing through that child's gaze that felt really important, that I wanted to get into this as well. That's now becoming a very long answer to your question, but yeah, is that good on process?
Oh, no, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Questions from the room? Back online, Patricia?
Yes, is my, yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Patricia, you're muted now.
Sorry.
That's okay, you're good.
Hello. I just want to say that the way that you read that, as well as the subject matter, is something I won't easily forget. It was very moving. Thank you very much. I thought it was a kind of companion piece, maybe to Silent Witness, which is on in the museum currently. And I think you touched on it, you know, the arts sometimes are the way of expressing the inexpressible. Aside from that, I was thinking about the confessional school of poetry and debates around that of, you know, Robert Lowell, Anne Sexton, people like that, you know, where they used their mental health problems or whatever mental health things to as the subject of their poetry. And I wonder, at what point did you reach a decision that you were going to use this thing that had happened in your life to kind of, well, I'm assuming that there was a point where you made that decision, because you could have made the decision to leave that to one side in a box, as you might say, to have that part of your identity separate, to say, I want to explore all sorts of things, and this is limiting. Now, I don't think it's limiting. In fact, it's very innovative, you know, combining the public with the personal. I really, really applaud you for doing that. But was there a point where you think, do I want to do this? Because it took a lot of courage, but it could be something that you could regret, in the sense that you might feel hemmed in then for other things that you might want to do when you've worked your way through this phase. But thank you again.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for those words and question. I mean, I think, like, let me think. The sole answer is probably, you know, I said in my previous answer, I'd done some of the work in writing typeface, but I mean, I've also done a lot of work in therapy, and it's, you know, it would be remiss of me not to say that talking therapy has really helped in my life. I've been sort of thinking about this aftermath for a while, and, you know, you have to do that work in yourself and first, I think, before you can, well, for me, it felt like before I can, you know, stand here and share with all of you today what this is. So, I mean, that's kind of one side of it. But in another way, there wasn't a moment where I sort of stopped and thought, oh no, because, you know, I'm interested in the poem as an event in language, like the poem is a happening. And so whatever the material, the poem is a transformation of its subject into an event in language. It's, you know, I love, like, Heaney uses the word open a lot, and open comes up, you know, in this book a few times, but I'm interested in what the poem can open up, which might be traumatic and difficult and full of grief, and it might be joyous, and it might be banal and strange and about slaters, and it's all those things at once. And so there's such excitement for me in the possibilities of what a poem can hold, and how even just one compacted box can contain all of that, can contain my childhood self, my adult self, my grief, my joy, the Psalms, you know, cartoons. That's that kind of everything now quality that I think children teach us about and remind us about. Creating that was so exciting for me. It was a real joy, and so it has been a joy to make this book. And yes, it has this difficult subject matter, but it was harder not to speak about it. It was harder for so many years to know, to have to carry this and to carry it alone. And I think so many of us are carrying these things. And so actually there's a great joy in being able to create it and share it now and with people and have conversation about it. I think the lonelier part and the harder part is when everything's kind of hidden away and you just shoulder your losses. So I feel very grateful that language can transform experience and make it an event. And I'm interested in those possibilities, I think.
Thank you, Patricia. Someone else? Yes, Duff.
I just wanted to kind of almost question the use of the childlike voice as a way of kind of using that as an opportunity to look towards the future and to open up something that maybe has always been considered closed and private. So this use of kind of the childlike or this child voice as a way of looking towards a hopeful future and using the kind of innocence of the child as a way to move past a very traumatic past, literally.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think about the child as a figure that opens up a hopeful future. I think about the traumatized child and the traumatized child that I am still. When I was writing Father Mother, which is a pamphlet that thinks about queer parenthood and becoming a parent and being a non-biological parent, wondering what our son Finn would call me, mother, father, mother. I was reading a lot of Donald Winnicott on play, and one of the things Winnicott says which really resonates with me is the idea that the 5-year-old contains the 4-year-old and the 3-year-old and the 2-year-old and the 1-year-old, and that on any given day you'll see all of those selves. So the child has a tantrum, and even though he or she is 5, they're suddenly now behaving like they're a baby. And I believe that that's true of all of us. That like the 3.5-year-old child who was there on that March morning is one of the oldest selves I have, one of the oldest selves I know. So the child is in no way kind of a symbol of anything. Like the child is me, and I am also the adult voice in this too. In Typeface there was no childhood me, but I wanted to bring those two together here. What that opens up, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a very future-oriented person at the best of time. My partner will confirm that this is true. She's already planning Halloween and Christmas, and I'm just about getting to like the next hour of my day. So, I mean, I did history and English. So it's probably not. I've always been interested in the past, but so I don't think about the future that much. But my contention is definitely that whatever route there is into one, whatever kind of future it's going to be, it's definitely through the difficult work of thinking about the presentness of the past. And yeah.
Thanks, Dov. I see Tim and Fran still have hands up. Do either of you want to come back and add something else?
I myself did have a second question. But,
sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm a retired psychologist, and you just made me think of one of the great lines from Winnicott: "The capacity to be alone begins in the presence of another." And I think it may really fit with your collection, actually, too. That wasn't my question, but it came up when you mentioned Winnicott. In terms of your revising of your work, did you find yourself in revision more having to add more in or take more out? And in terms of the writing of it, did you find yourself writing in a chronological manner, or did you move through time at different periods of your writing?
Thank you so much. I love that quotation. Do you know the source of the Winnicott?
I can dig it out for you, and I'll be happy to get it to you in the future. Yeah, it's from a great article of his. I'll try to dig it out for you.
Oh, I enjoy his writing. Yeah, thank you for that. Chaos, not chronology. I think yourself. It's how the mind works. It's just coming and going, flitting and floating all over the place, really. because the box is kind of a mess. I mean, it's it's just stuff. It's so much stuff. So it really was just quite a haphazard experience of pulling things out, and sometimes just typing verbatim what I found, and sometimes poems would come from there, but sometimes it was just kind of gathering up that material, typing, just to sort of notice things in the source material. And in that, I found my eye drawn to the generic material in the diary, so the first aid instructions, the advertisements, the stuff at the front and back, the tube map. I started to look at all of that and knew there was something about just having it in this box, which meant that I just gave, like the diary, for example, a different quality of attention. And the writing of it, the first draft that I did it kind of was a complete thing. There was another whole batch of poems then that I really tried to explore more of my religious background, because I kind of grew up in a Baptist church and then also in a very kind of large evangelical kind of Pentecostal fundamentalist church for a while. And writing about that was a bit of a surprise, honestly, in these poems, finding the ways in which that tradition has been formative. So I wrote a lot of poems about that, and they didn't all make it in. My partner was very good about saying, no, please let those hit the cutting room floor. So there were quite, and Ciaran, I remember it was something I talked with Ciaran about. He was really interested in the religious stuff as well, and kind of really interested. So we had good conversations. But yes, there were lots of them that didn't make it. And then there was a really lovely, enjoyable process at the very end of going to stay with Paul Maddern at the River Mill, wonderful writing retreat, and just having more than 100, 120, whatever, A4 sheets, and just laying them out on the floor and moving everything around and starting to put together over the course of a long weekend kind of different versions of things. And that was a real joy. It's just lovely. I mean, I knew there were some things I wanted to go side by side, but I was really thinking about the landscape of the double facing page. I was really thinking about kind of this as being the space of where the eye kind of rests. And so this relationship between what's happening on both sides, and then thinking, about the structure of the book. And I knew it would be the kind of thing you would read sort of front to back. So that was a real joy. That was a really lovely bit of it when the poems were sort of done. And there were a few things then that came along after that as well, and things that changed shape. Some of them I held on to titles even, and things that weren't in blocks. There were a few things, and then just compressing everything even more at the very last stage was a nice part of the process too. But and then it went into a drawer for a long time, and I thought, no, maybe I'll not do anything with this. And then it came out of the drawer again. Anyway, thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. So Gail, you started with a quotation from Ciaran Carson. And it's clear Ciaran's been a major influence on your work. Can you say a little bit more about his role in shaping the way you've developed as a poet? And there's obviously someone who's deeply missed.
Deeply missed. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years. 2 years this month. I know we miss him. We miss him still. Oh, I mean, Ciaran. What can you say about Ciaran? I miss chatting with him about clothes, there was a lot of clothes chat, and eBay finds and the cut of things and menswear. We had a lot of good chats about that. Also poems. And his work is just, every book. What I love about Ciaran's work, and he's an utterly unique writer in this way, is that no two books are the same, and that he finds a form for each new subject, really. And he's just so formally versatile and bold and interesting. So I think I've learned from every single book, across from the long line and the short and the versions and translations and Rima. He's just he does it all. And that quality of music as well. One of the last conversations I had with him, in fact, the last conversation I had with him, just not long before he died, we were sitting at his kitchen table, and we were going through this actually, and he had all the poems printed out and put in a sort of blue test. I remember I've still got it at home because Deirdre gave it to me, like a blue Tesco's folder, and he printed them all out in like ring bound folder. Like, who uses those anymore? But anyway, he does. And we were just looking at them together, and he was really noticing the music that was in the poems, and I hadn't really, like, even in that dentist one that I read, the EDCB, like a musical scale, and that, just noticing things that I hadn't really seen. With Ciaran, it was mostly just, with this, it was kind of showing him things and him going, yeah, you know, I like it, or I don't. I was just lucky enough to sort of seek him out, I guess, a few years ago when I was starting to write poems, and he responded generously, as he always does, and was just an extraordinary teacher. I think to everybody who knew him, you know, his love of language, his love of life, his curiosity, he was just inquisitive, and nothing was boring to him, nothing was beyond his interest, and I think he's utterly unique in that way. He just, so that sense of everything, you know, the possibilities of the poem and everything getting into it, I mean, that I want to have that sense as well, that you're interested in everything and it all gets into the poem. But yeah, he's dearly missed, and I think, you know, the way we teach on the MA in poetry in particular, and we really we speak of him often, and we try to, I think, pass on to students now so much of how he taught, and that means telling people to spend a lot of time in the OED mostly, but other things too. Yeah.
Fran, did you want to come back? See, your hand is still up, or is that an old hand?
Old hands, new hands.
I don't have a hand up.
Oh, okay. It's a glitch in the system. Sorry. Do we have anyone else in the room? Wants to ask anything? Yes.
Reading and discussion is really, really fabulous. And because of that, in many ways, I'm curious, you began, and I know it was just an introductory remark, but you talked about some kind of worry about historians asking you difficult questions. I'm a historian,
Yes.
and it seems to me we have so much more to learn from you in many ways than you have from us. Even that time that recent exchange about chronology and chaos, or taking things back from an archive and building something so powerful out of it. I suppose I wonder, in that then, why there's a nervousness in history.
Yeah, good question. It's maybe just because I did an event recently and I got a question about the historical aftermath of the breakout in the maze and all that, and it threw me a little bit, and I didn't really want to get into all of that publicly, I guess. But it's interesting that you say that about literature and history, because actually, so many moons ago, I did an English literature and history degree at Edinburgh, and I was taught by Owen Dudley Edwards. And Owen Dudley Edwards' way of teaching history was to read literature. So we did Irish history, we did American history, and we kind of started with Hiawatha, you know, Longfellow, and kind of went through to like Joseph Heller, Catch-22, and that was how we read American history. And with, I can't remember where we started, probably Mangan, I think it was like mid 19th century, you know, to Seamus Heaney probably. So, and that was how we understood history, and we were to understand literature as primary source. That was kind of where we were at. So it was really, and I was doing English as well. So I was reading literature, but on a joint degree. So that's, and it was in an interesting moment at that time, because all the kind of like philosophy of history stuff and theory, critical, was sort of only beginning to emerge on the history side of things, whereas I was like getting heavy critical theory in lit, and so the historians that were teaching me were sort of, some of them were kind of panicking a little bit. So it was really interesting to see how those different disciplines think about historiography and writing and all of that stuff. Anyway, yeah, so I don't know, my nervousness is probably just because I had another question, but also, I don't know, maybe just that we bring, what expectations do we bring to the poems, that, you know, what do we expect of them? I think sometimes we undervalue poetry. We don't think it, you know, it's sort of like this can console or is pretty or is something. But other times maybe, especially in relation to violence, we can kind of bring the weight of expectation too. So maybe it was a nervousness about what expectations will you all bring to what these poems can do in this forum or something. I don't know. But I'm really interested in these moments which are where critical and creative, you know, where those things are all folded in together, where everything can be in the same virtual and physical room. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Either online or in the room? Yes.
Hi, Gail.
Hi.
Just wanted to ask, how early in your writing process do you share with other people, and Do you ever get nervous about, I guess?
Always. Oh, it depends. I mean, well, I'm casting my mind back because there's been so little writing in the lab because of the pandemic. There's just been a lot of hanging out with the toddler and watching Paw Patrol. So I can't really remember, but once upon a time I was writing poems and sharing them. Do you know, I think with me it's probably things have to feel pretty finished. You know, you sit with something a long time and every single poem is different. Some come in a rush and they are finished and some take years. And you sort of learn to just tune into that a wee bit. But it's just to choose your readers carefully. You know, my partner is actually a really good reader and has a very good kind of, you know, working bullshit detector. And Ciaran, likewise, you know, he's an amazing reader. So, and then trusted friends, but not that many people really. And with this, as I say, it was kind of all done before I showed it to anybody really the first time. And I had a sense at that point that it was a thing. Whereas for a long time I was sort of like, is this really a thing? It was the same as typeface. I thought, I'm not really, I'm just doing this thing, but it's never going to see the light of day. And I think that's usually a good space to be in when you're writing, hopefully. So hopefully I'll get back there someday.
Thank you very much, everyone. Can I just really finish up here by, on your behalf, thanking Gail for coming and sharing with us this afternoon, her introduction and her readings from The Sun is Open. It's a very powerful piece of writing. I've enjoyed reading it over the last week. I'm sure all of you have enjoyed listening to the extracts from it today. Can I ask you to thank Gail in a normal fashion, both in the room and if you want to unmute yourselves wherever you are at home and give her a round of applause.